Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be welcomed by Alan Morrison for yet another Celtic by Numbers podcast. Welcome back, Alan.
Yeah, hi Paul. Thanks. Getting used to my surroundings now. It's so nice to hear another different voice.
Yes, and as you've just alluded to, we are still in isolation. How's that treating you? How are you getting through it?
Yeah, it's not too bad. For me, it's probably less impactful than a lot of people who are very heavily impacted, as I'm used to kind of working from home and I'm used to the sort of video conferencing style of work. So in that regard, it's I'm a lot better off than a lot of people are who I'm sure have been heavily disrupted.
It's a real pleasure once again to have you on with your numbers. This is the numbers game, and this week we are going to be talking about Leigh Griffiths. Leigh Griffiths, I remember the first time I seen Leigh playing in the flesh, and believe it or not, Alan, it was at that Scottish football hotbed of Central Park in Cowdenbeath.
Oh, brilliant.
So the scene was set. No disrespect to anyone who supports Cowdenbeath, but I've not visited every Scottish football ground, but the worst one that I've ever visited is Central Park, Alan. I'm sorry. I mean, there's a wall behind the goal. As soon as you go in, there's a wall, and you can pull bricks out the wall, should you desire, you know. And obviously it's a stock car racing circuit as well.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got the big white tyres that are like tractor tyres all around the pitch. And I know that there's people that give their heart and soul into running clubs like Cowdenbeath, so please don't take this the wrong way. But that stadium is not what you would expect of a senior football club. And on this particular occasion, Griffiths was getting a fair bit of stick, and I'm not actually sure if it was from the Hibs fans or the Cowden fans. But when he scored, he gave it the get it up you know, the one that Berkovic done against Kilmarnock to the Celtic fans.
Yeah.
So straight away he made an impression, Alan, and he was known for being a really phenomenal goal scorer at every club that he'd been at. I mean, I know that he was only at Hibs because the move to Wolves didn't seem to work out, but he still scored maybe a goal every 2 games at Wolves. He was very prolific when Neil Lennon shelled out just over £1 million for him, wasn't he?
From memory, it might even have been a bit less than that. I think it was something like 800,000 or 900,000. But anyway, quibbling, it wasn't a lot for a goal scorer.
Definitely not. I mean, I've had a look at his statistics, and I remember around about the time that he was on the road to scoring 40 goals in a single season, Alan, I started looking at his previous goal scoring record for Livingston, Dundee, Wolves and Hibs. And what we have is we've got a player who at the time of the final game under Ronnie Dyler, when we won 7-0, you remember there were 7 different goal scorers that day. Jack Aitchison became the youngest ever Celtic goal scorer.
That's right, yeah. I think Ryan Christie scored his first Celtic goal that day as well.
Yes, and Tierney scored a belter as well. I do remember that. At that point, and Griffiths never played that day actually, but at that point he had started 265 senior games and he had scored 172 goals. So the most basic of stats, which is what I work on, Alan, I'm not as intrinsic as yourself, and that's why you're on the show to tell me how it actually is. It shows you just how prolific he was. And of course that season, when he scored 40 goals, he joined an elite band of Celtic players, only 8 players in the history of the club who had scored 40 or more goals in a single season, and he's in a list alongside the likes of Jimmy McGrory, Henrik Larsson, Joe McBride, Kenny Dalglish, Bobby Lennox, Brian McClare and Charlie Nicholas. So we had a phenomenal striker on our hands at that point. Let's have a wee look at what happened next, Alan. What's your take on what happened next? Dyler leaves, in comes Rodgers, big fanfare, everything changes.
It does, and that 15-16 season, as we look back, it does seem to be been the high watermark. And as you say, you look at that record that you've just reeled off there, and the fact that he was only, I think, 25 years old at the time, you sort of think this is a guy who's going to end up with just the most incredible goal-scoring record and could be one of the highest-scoring Celts of all time. And in that season, he scored 36 goals from open play, so 4 were penalties. Mm-hmm. But remarkably, he only completed 90 minutes 29 times. So 29 games he started and finished, and still ended up with 36, non-penalty goals, as I call them. And his scoring rate that season was, he's 0.82 non-penalty goals per 90 minutes, which is a phenomenal rate at any level, really, frankly. And the other stat a couple of other stats that I've pulled out from that season, which I think are pertinent as we go forward through the years with Griffiths, is he only missed 4 games through injury in that 15-16 season. He was the main striker. I mean, Deila tended to generally play one up front as well, and in that season it was Griffiths. And a feature of his play, I mean, again, you don't need to have a lot of advanced stats to get this, is he just took a lot of shots. It was really that simple. The guy was taking more than 6 shots in a match, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's one of these things where the difference between having 6 shots in a game and 5 over a season is quite a number of shots, and probably translates into a much lower kind of expected goals likely. So, over 6 shots a season, I think, is the only player, that season is the only instance of a player averaging more than 6 shots in a game, per game, that I've recorded in the last however many years of data I've got, sort of 6 seasons now. So that was quite a standout piece. I mean, the guy scored lots of goals, he took lots of shots. It was the classic case of, buy more tickets, got more chance of winning the lottery type of thing. And then, so that was the high watermark. And then, as you said, Rodgers comes in and has got quite almost a set way really of how he wanted to play. A very possession-based, patient game. Lots of control of possession, lots of control of the ball, which, to be fair, has never been Griffiths' forte. Griffiths is a player who he doesn't have a lot of possession, and when he does have it, he tends to try to do things. They don't always come off. He gives away possession a lot. He's probably got one of the lowest pass completion rates of any player that I've seen at Celtic. He's similar. I mentioned Anthony Stokes quite a lot. Anthony Stokes, to me, was somebody who could be incredibly creative, a lot of chances, but he also made a lot of poor decisions, gave the ball away a lot as well. And Griffiths is a little bit like that. He doesn't always make the best decisions. He does sometimes shoot from very optimistic angles. He does sometimes try a pass that really is probably not really on. And I think, not only did that maybe not suit Rodgers' style of play, but which was more about exerting control, pressure, being careful with the ball, working it into areas of the pitch where you could create overloads. He also had acquired, by that stage, Moussa Dembele, and he, was more of a traditional target player, but obviously quite quickly proved himself to be an incredibly gifted player as well. And he quickly became the man leading the line. Now, in that season, Rodgers' first season, Griffith still managed to end up with 16 goals, non-penalty goals, which is a decent return to say he wasn't anywhere near the first striker. But at this stage, we're starting to see a bit of a trend across the numbers. The first trend is he only completed 90 minutes 12 times in that season. So again, 16 goals from only completing 90 minutes 12 times is good, and he still averaged 0.7 goals per game, which is again a fantastic rate. I mean, you talk about strikers averaging a goal every other game. Well, 0.7 is way better than that. But the other telling piece that happened that season is he missed 16 games, so he missed more games through injury than he completed 90 minutes. He missed 16 games through injury, and these kind of lower leg muscle type injuries started to become more and more prevalent. And it wasn't so much just the fact that it was one major injury. It was niggly injuries, and I think this was, I can't remember exactly. You'll probably remember better than me. Rodgers did start to make comments about his conditioning, and having those consistent muscle type injuries did hint that perhaps there was an issue there. And I think what we saw subsequently is that trend continuing. the next season, 2017-18, he still scored 12 goals. I mean, that's not rubbish. And he only completed 90 minutes 7 times. But he was injured 15 times again. His goal rate went down. He's taking less shots. And then, of course, last season was, probably the nadir of his career. He only completed 4 90 minutes. He missed 40-odd games through, with illness and an injury, which obviously the club, is confidential and so forth in terms of the background to that. But I think it was reasonably well documented that he was given time off by the club for reasons outside of football, and he scored 2 goals across the season, and so there was it's almost these are not 3 disastrous seasons. I mean, you're still talking about somebody who scored 30 goals across those 3 seasons. It's not like a complete disaster, but given what had happened in the 15-16 season, and given how his age profile, it was a definite, downturn in that sense.
And again, during that period as well, a couple of other things happened. I mean, Leigh Griffiths scoring the 2 goals for Scotland against England was June 2017, so we're a year into the Brendan Rodgers tenure, and he scored arguably 2 of the finest dead balls he's ever struck, in his career that particular day. So as you say, it's not as though his form fell off the end of a cliff. There was all these other circumstances surrounding it. Brendan Rodgers, completely a different approach to training, to conditioning, to the mentality, and obviously the style of play. And also you've mentioned there that Dembele came in, and then eventually Edouard came in as well. So the opportunities were getting slimmer and slimmer for Leigh Griffiths. There's a big point that I tried to make a few weeks ago, just on the eve of the Celtic Rangers game, Alan, and the point I made was they were trying to compare the managerial performances of Neil Lennon, Mark II, against Steven Gerrard. And my argument was, well, the scores and the league positions and all that kind of stuff, that all speaks for itself. Celtic were obviously vastly improved in terms of the overall win rate under Neil Lennon at that stage. But the point I tried to make, Alan, was Leigh Griffiths was at a crossroads when Neil Lennon came back in, a crossroads in his career when Neil Lennon came back in charge of the Celtic team. And although a massive amount of credit obviously has to go to Leigh himself, you've got to look at the part played by Neil Lennon. Neil Lennon has played a massive part in managing Leigh Griffiths back into the side, to the point where, what we're going to go and speak about in just a moment or so, Alan, he has come back into the side and has started providing us with glimpses of the Leigh Griffiths of old. He's not there yet, we know that, but he was providing us with those kind of glimpses. And I think a big bit of credit needs to go to Neil Lennon for that recovery, for that resurrection of Leigh Griffiths' career almost.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, not only did, as you say, the injuries and the other off-field problems mounted, but the competition on the pitch through the players that you mentioned, but also Sinclair. I mean, Sinclair's role in the team is more really as a support striker than an out winger, and his relative, his success, absolute success, especially over the first couple of seasons he was here, even further restricted the need for a player like Griffith. So you're really looking at a player who at the beginning of this season, and under a new manager, had mounting injury problems, mounting off-field problems. Definitely almost not 3 lost years, but certainly ever decreasing involvement in the first team, players brought in who were being successful in positions he might like to play. So it wasn't a great picture. So, and it is rare. It's not often you see the case that a player comes back from a situation like that at a club.
Yeah,
it would normally happen that somebody would be moved on. But I think you're right to call out Lennon. He does seem to deal quite well with, let's call them, kind of maverick players. I'm not sure Leigh Griffiths is as much of a maverick as people, or the press certainly seem to make out. I mean, he's a bit cheeky sometimes, and I think he does things that make supporters laugh a little bit. And he's obviously a boy who's got a bit of the street football kind of mentality about him. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't get involved in a lot of controversy on the pitch particularly. He's a bit gallous, as they say. But I think Lennon likes that kind of player. I think Lennon recognises in himself that slightly maverick spirit.
It's a good way to describe it.
And I think he comes from a tough part of the world as well. And I think Leigh did come from a tough part of the world growing up. And I know that when he was at Falkirk as a kid, he didn't get taken on there, not because he wasn't good enough, but because he just struggled to get to training because of his circumstances. It's an unfortunate story in that regard. So I think Lennon probably sees all that and recognises it, resonates, and absolutely rare that somebody comes back and gets back into the team after that many years of sort of downturn, I suppose.
And the big thing I think that we all realise as well, Alan, is the affinity that he had with the support. You used a really, really good term there, maverick spirit. He certainly does have that. And we've done a series of podcasts with Colin Watt on the cult player, and there's certain elements of Leigh Griffiths' behaviour which fall into that category, I would suggest. When you look at, he's just scored a goal, a scarf lands on the pitch, and he picks it up and he starts giving it the kind of whirlwind with the scarf. The fans love that. I think he wiped his nose on an Ibrox corner flag. He ties scarves onto posts. He was waving a tricolour from the crowds. There was a bottle of bucky thrown on the pitch when we were playing Linfield. He picked it up and got booked. It was kind of going back to the Johnny Doyle sending off for hitting a ref with the ball against Ayr United. But there's also the elements. I remember a picture of Leigh Griffiths at training where he's falling out with one of his teammates and he's trying to go for them and people are holding him back. And then there's the tea cakes, eating them in the dugout. And I remember when he was subbed off once and he walked right past Rodgers. He wasn't happy with Rodgers. Was it Partick Thistle we were playing that night? So there is a wee bit of maverick spirit, but as football fans, we can relate to that, can't we, Alan? Because especially in the modern day, if they show a few flaws, we realise that, they're just like the rest of us because we're all imperfect human beings,
Yeah. And it's funny, I'm probably I like to look at the numbers and the analysis, and it can be a little bit clinical. I love the passion and the quirkiness as much as anyone, but I do sense among Celtic fans, Celtic fans do like someone who's perceived to be a bit of an underdog, someone who's kind of dragged themselves up maybe from unfortunate circumstances, who's got a bit of that swagger and cockiness and a bit of arrogance about them, who does unexpected things, who's the one of us kind of thing. And even though he makes no secret of being a Hibs fan, he still endears himself to the Celtic supporter. I'm forever fielding questions about Griffiths where it's clear that people have a massive affinity to him and just think he's brilliant, and the numbers just don't stack up in terms of he really isn't on the same level as the Dembele or Edouard, and sort of disappointing to people. But I think as a Celtic fan, a lot of Celtic fans kind of get blinded by the other stuff a little bit. But having said all that, that's not to say that there's not real value in having him in the squad. Clearly there is, and it's going to be fascinating to see at 29 what his role is going forward. Given that I honestly don't. I think if Celtic ended up with him being the number one striker again, we will have taken a step backward from the Dembele Edouard seasons. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Leon. That's just the numbers don't lie in that respect. And I suppose that's the next question in my mind, and the question for you as well is if do you think that we'll get him back to the sort of 15, 16 levels, or what is a good level for Leigh to get back to?
I think, it is a great question, and also when you mentioned Dembele and Edouard, we kind of view these almost as guilty pleasures, Alan. We know we're not going to have them for 10 years, they come in, they show the ability that you realise is going to culminate in a huge bid from elsewhere, be that England or elsewhere. And I know that the scenario at the moment is completely different because no one knows what the situation is going to be if and when we get back to normal in relation to football finance. But with regards to Griffiths, I think a club like Celtic, it's very important to have almost your bedrocks. And we've got a few that came through the ranks, and I thought Tierney was going to be in the same category as James Forrest and McGregor. And I keep banging the drum about this 500 club. Forrest is definitely going to make 500 appearances.
Yeah.
McGregor may also join that. illustrious club. Tierney would have no problem. He would have been in there as well. And I'm not saying Griffiths is going to get to that stage, but if you've got players who have been in the club, in and about the club for 5, 6, 7 years, that's important, you know. It really is important. And then Griffiths might have to look at that and say he's not going to start every game as well. And as long as he accepts that, if you get Griffiths back up to 20, 25 goals a season at this stage of his career, when he's playing alongside someone like Edouard or whoever it may be in the future, I think we've got back to a stage that we would have expected Leigh Griffiths to be at 29 or 30.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's all fair comment, and I think it's a good point you make about the need to have that backbone that is, you know, almost constant, and you know, stars may come and go, but these, you know, very good players are always there. And if Griffiths is willing to accept that he may be almost the second or even third striker, but nevertheless vital to the squad in that sense, I think you've outlined what could be, you know, a sort of you know, a rosy, you know, latter part of his career for him. I'm just, because I honestly don't think he will get back to the numbers and the level that he did in 15-16, but I'm of course delighted to be proven wrong. Even this season, you know, he actually, you know, it really only was in the latter part of the season, actually after the winter break, that he started to really get back into the team. He started the season sporadically. He got 90 minutes in the sort of dead rubber away at Nomi, the Calju team. You know, we're already 5-0 up. He then was injured most of September to October again, September, October, November, and then he started to appear again sort of towards the end of January. And when the shift went to, you know, the 3-5-2, which was probably for many reasons, I think the fullbacks probably weren't as working as well, and plus the injuries in that place, Elyounoussi being injured, you were almost through, I think, a bit of choice. I think Lennon likes his two up front, and a bit of you know, working with what you've got. We've ended up in a situation where Griffiths got paired with Edouard, and actually it worked really well. And I think I said in the previous podcast that the partnership is good. The numbers back it up. The number of chances they're creating for each other, the number of times they link up. You know, strikers don't touch the ball as much as anyone else. You know, less than anyone else on the pitch, and they complete quite a few passes. But 8 passes between each other doesn't sound a lot, but it is pretty good for strikers. And you know, since he's formed that partnership with Edouard, he's actually scored 8 goals and 4 assists in 844 minutes. That equates to 1.3 scoring contributions per 90 minutes, which is fantastic. It's actually a great rate. So, you know, it's a small sample, but it's indicative that, you know, not being the number one striker, having a player like Edouard there with him is actually revitalising him. And he ended up the season, you know, with 11 goals, which is decent considering.
Yeah. His
strike rate of 0.6 goals per 90 minutes was better than the last 2 seasons. Not up to his 16-17 or 15-16, but it's nevertheless getting better. And I think, but I think his game is changing. I think, you know, we are seeing a slightly different Griffiths, and one of the reasons why I say I don't think we'll get the old one back. Things like he really doesn't run with the ball as much as he used to. He used to be decent at you know, taking the ball forward and a decent pace about him, but he's actually got the least number of ball carries of anyone in the squad. He's just not running with the ball anymore. He is tending to pass it off a bit more than he used to. And he doesn't get involved in the play as much. You know, I've got a couple of stats that I collect which shows the extent to which players are involved in the build-up. And his overall sort of packing rate is very low, which is indicative of, you know, receiving the ball, forward passes, and also giving forward passes and running with the ball. And he doesn't get involved in many, you know, secondary assists, which is tending, you know, again, getting involved in the pass before the assisting pass. He actually creates very few chances from open play. It's just slightly less than one a game, which is, again, is low for a striker. But where he is almost a bit of where he kind of makes up for it is in his set piece play. So he is actually creates 1.6 chances from open play. From set pieces every game, which is the best in the squad. Now, there's a little article a few weeks ago comparing him and Christie on set pieces, corners and free kicks. And basically, long story short, is Griffiths is the number one in the squad in terms of being able to create chances from set plays, especially corners. Actually, his corners create better chances than Christie's do. Christie actually creates slightly better chances from free kicks, interestingly. But anyway, so I think there's almost a distilled version of Griffith as he gets towards his 30s, where we're seeing less explosive pace, we're seeing less involvement in build-up, we're seeing his set piece skills being important to the squad, and when he does get the chance, his goal scoring rate is still decent, it's still good, and more than decent really. He is taking less shots, but again, got to put it into context. That average of 6 shots a game that he was taking in his 40-goal season is phenomenal. He's now only taking the same number of shots per game as Edouard, and we wouldn't doubt that Edouard is a cracking striker. So I think there's a lot of glimpses of optimism there, and it might be, as I say, a slightly lesser Griffiths, but nevertheless still a highly effective one that we see going forward.
Yes, and I think when you look at the situation, Alan, like you've mentioned there, the very fact that he's come back from that is really key to this. And if he can attain a level that might not be what we would have expected, but is still contributing to Celtic as a team and as an overall squad, we should be thankful, because the boy could have been lost to the game. And I know the discussions I had with a few high-profile pundits who work a fair bit on TV was that he would never come back. So it's brilliant to see him coming back. It really is. It really is. And he's entered the realms of the 100 club as well in terms of the goals that he's scored. And I'm pretty sure over the next 2 or 3 seasons he'll add to that. I think two of the most important allies he's got at Celtic Park at the moment is Neil Lennon and Scott Brown. And I don't see Brown going anywhere. He may retire, but I think he'll still be part of the boot room at Celtic Park. And as long as Brown and Lennon is there, I think we'll get what you would have expected out of Griffiths. He might play till he's 33, 34. And hopefully that'll be in the green and white hoops. I'm a big fan. I think I share the kind of views of many my fellow supporters. You've seen that, Alan, when he was warming up, the half dozen times he was warming up at Celtic Park. But I did get to that point where I thought, right, how often are we going to cheer Griffiths for warming up? Let's see what he can do. I wanted him to get in amongst the goals again. I remember he came on against Hamilton and he just made a nuisance of himself. But, he done enough for us to actually infiltrate and eventually score the winning goal. I think, he might not get an assist, but he was making a nuisance of himself in the lead up to that. So a massive fan, and I think the way that you've described that, obviously all the circumstances surrounding it added up to 3 seasons that we wouldn't have expected. We thought he would have gone for 40 goals and continued a great run of form. But hopefully we'll see him back in the new season, whenever that may be. Alan, I know that you've shared a few articles from overseas in relation to the fact that, football might be back, but it won't be in front of a crowd and that kind of thing as well, which obviously puts a lot of risk in relation to the financial future of a lot of clubs in Scotland. But we will continue to speak about Celtic and look into the next season, because that's what we need to do. We are still chasing 10 in a row, because I think everybody realises that 9 is a given now. Obviously, Leigh Griffiths has played a big part in that, which is one of the biggest successes of the club's history. So great to see him back, Alan.
No, absolutely. And it's cruel that he hit a hat trick in the last game, and his season kind of ended there, as does everyone's, unfortunately. But no, I think there's lots of signs for optimism, and I think it could be one of the success stories from this season to see him re-establish himself as a useful member, a more than useful member of the squad. Might not be the star striker he was, but that's not to say he can't be incredibly valuable going forward.
Absolutely. Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Let's do it again next week, where we'll be speaking about Celtic by numbers on a Celtic State of Mind. Take care until then, Alan.
Yeah, and you, Paul. Thanks very much again.
Thank you.